Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Hero Movie Podcast, your greatest source for superhero movie discussion in the multiverse. I am your host, Adam Portrais, and I am joined by Sweet Sean's Kovacs from the internet and Bruce Leslie. Unfortunately, some weird thing happened and GarageBand ate up the beginning of the show. I don't know. Beats the heck out of me. But I do want to mention real quick, and we'll just kind of roll the trailer in just a second and then get on into the regular show because the rest of the show is fine. Don't worry. But I do want to say today we're covering the Mask of Zorro, and we're doing that on account of you lovely people who support us over at patreon.com/HMP. Those fine folks get the pre-show, the post-show, and of course the Dinger Zone. And this is a big one, everybody. We're wrapping up our Mission Impossible series, Mission Impossible Fallout this week. So 6 weeks, 6 Mission Impossible movies. It's a heck of a lot of fun. And next week we're starting another series of films. Little hint there. There may be 8 or 9 of those films in the next series. So we got a lot of fun stuff coming. And so, beginning of the month is happening, people. So hit us up, patreon.com/HMP. Again, value for value. Whatever this show brings you as far as value goes, throw it back to us in monetary form. We really appreciate that. And the best part is it helps keeps the show going, and you get more stuff in return. So how can you lose, man? But if you can't afford that, and I completely understand, we don't want to cause any kind of hardship or anything from you. So if you can't do that, share the show with a friend, tell somebody about it, or at least leave a 5-star review on iTunes or wherever else you put podcasts. Share it with a friend, man. We know you got friends out there. Well, at least we certainly hope you do. So share it with those people. We'd really, really appreciate it. And we are now on Spotify now, so we want to get some of that Joe Rogan money. It's not going to happen. But, so if you get podcasts on Spotify, we're there available as stuff now. And, so that's patreon.com/HMP. And what else am I thinking of? youtube.com/Hero Movie Podcast. We post all of our podcasts up there, and there's a new video coming very, very soon, talking about Zack Snyder's Justice League cut. Snyder Cut, #Snyder Cut. Check that out. All of those are available in the show notes, so check that out. Let's go ahead and take a listen to the trailer for The Mask of Zorro and then join the rest of the crew. See you.
Some say he's a legend.
Zorro was a servant of the people. He did what was needed.
Now he's needed again.
Others, a ghost.
Be careful, señorita. There are dangerous men about.
Some say he fights for justice.
There are some who would call him heroic.
Others for revenge.
All that playing with swords, shooting guns, racing around on horses. Such sweaty pursuits are hardly the work of a gentleman.
No one has seen his face.
Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. I had impure thoughts about a man.
Lustful?
Yes, lustful.
But everyone knows his mark.
No bad?
The only sin would be to deny what your heart truly feels. No bad at all.
Search everything!
You know, Zorro, it could be anywhere. Did you miss me?
It's only one man.
It isn't just one man, damn it. It's Zorro.
That was the trailer for Mask of Zorro from 1998. We do a little thing on this show where not only do we talk about the actual show itself, we talk about how it relates back to comic books. And if I could have this stupid mouse click on the daggum button, there it is. Oh, that's the male one. Hold on. But if you want to email us, heromoviepodcast@gmail.com. Bruce, Zorro. We've covered a little bit of Zorro before. What do we got for us this time?
Well, the character Zorro, Don Diego de la Vega, was created in 1919 by American pulp writer Johnston McCulley for All Story Weekly, the same magazine that first graced us with John Carter. So wearing a black costume complete with a cape, a hat known as a sombrero cordobés, and a mask covering the upper half of his face, armed with a rapier, he rode his trusty steed, a black horse called Tornado, to fight for the rights of the little guy against his wealthy, aristocratic oppressors. A skilled acrobat, Zorro not only fought with his famous blade, but he also proved quite handy with both bullwhip and pistol. The word Zorro means fox, thus making him the inspiration for Dora the Explorer's arch nemesis Swiper. And like a fox, he never uses brute strength. Instead, more likely, he uses his sly mind and well-practiced technique to outmatch an opponent. Zorro's original series are set during the era of Spanish California, which lasted from 1769 to 1821. And Don Diego de la Vega is a young man who is the only son of Don Alejandro de la Vega, who just happens to be the richest landowner in California, while unfortunately Diego's mother is dead. Diego learned his swordsmanship while at the university in Spain, and he created his masked alter ego after he was unexpectedly summoned home by his father because California had fallen into the hands of an oppressive dictator. Senor Zorro became an outlaw in the Pueblo of Los Angeles in California to, quote, avenge the helpless, to punish cruel politicians, and to aid the oppressed, end quote. And he's dubbed the Curse of Capistrano. Now, in order to divert suspicion about his identity, Diego hides his fighting abilities while also pretending to be a coward and a fop, never demonstrated more clearly than in the timeless classic Zorro the Gay Blade, which we've already covered. Now, The Mark of Zorro, a film from 1920 starring Douglas Fairbanks, really launched Zorro's popularity among the masses. Zorro would go on to feature in at least a dozen movies, 7 TV shows, and a line of Topps trading cards. And, of course, comics. Zorro comics are currently published by American Mythology Comics, the same folks who bring us Three Stooges comics, and from whom I'm hoping to someday receive an inquiry. Now, heavily inspired by Sir Percy Blakeney's Scarlet Pimpernel and widely acknowledged as perhaps the most significant influence on all-time most well-known comic book character Batman, Zorro is truly a hero for the ages.
Well, and this one is a little bit different than what you might normally see. Here's the IMDb plotline. As we know, IMDb always 100% correct in everything they say and or do. A young thief seeking revenge for the death of his brother is trained by the once great but aged Zorro, who also pursues vengeance of his own. This is directed by Martin Campbell, starring Antonio Banderas, Anthony Hopkins, Catherine Zeta-Jones, and Stuart Wilson. I think that this, like I said, this was out in 1998. Martin Campbell was kind of on the top of the world at the time. He had just directed GoldenEye, which brought James Bond back in a big giant way. And so I think that at that point he could kind of do whatever he wanted. And this was a big deal, or at least I remember it being one. Yeah,
I think it was definitely heavily promoted.
Yeah, so it says budget.
This is the kind of movie where it sneaks up on you.
Mm-hmm.
I remember seeing this, not when it came out, but when it came out to VOD, and it was a surprise. In this thing, originally I was like, "Oh, that's a good movie." I liked it, even though my sensibility at the time was not like it is now. Like I was a bit more. I liked movies that were a bit more bombastic, and yet this movie delivers. It was very good. I remember being very good at the time. I hadn't watched it since then. And just terrific, this movie. I love this movie. But I wanted to see what other people thought about it. And so I looked around, and this is how old this movie is. I watched the Siskel and Ebert review of this movie.
Nice.
And Siskel was not a fan. But Ebert loved it. And even said if Douglas Fairbanks Sr. was alive today, he would like this movie.
And that kind of goes to their dynamic a whole lot, too, because Siskel always tended to be more of the kind of snooty, film critic and everything. Ebert tended to be a little bit more of the people, not always, and they certainly both hated horror films and stuff to a wild and crazy degree, which I always thought was fairly unwarranted. But yeah, Ebert tended to be a little bit more on the consumer side, if you will.
Yeah, I can see that.
Do you guys like? I know there's a sequel to this movie, and it's not nearly as good. But is this a movie that you guys have seen a lot of?
I think I've probably seen it maybe 3 times at most. You said you didn't see it till VOD. I don't know if you meant like you didn't see it until actual VOD, or if you meant you went to Blockbuster and demanded the video. That was your version of VOD.
Yeah, I went to Blockbuster.
Yeah, because it would have been a few years later, I think, before you could just.
I demand you rent me this film, please. I demand it.
I rented it. I rented it at Blockbuster or equivalent, so I probably saw it like. I don't know how long it took it to come out on video, but, within a year of its release, I'd imagine. I didn't go to the theater to see it. I saw it at home, liked it good enough. Then I think one time I went over to a friend's house who was showing off his new DVD and surround sound and big screen TV, and he put this movie on. So this might be the 3rd time I've watched it. I liked it. I liked it just fine. I'm a big Zorro fan, but I didn't dig in. It's not like one I watched once a year or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that I've watched this a ton. I couldn't tell you how many times, but this was one certainly in the VHS days that was played fairly a lot. Not as much as, like I would say Jurassic Park or Mission Impossible or something like that. I played those like a gajillion times. But this was one that I always had a lot of fun with. And it was interesting going into this. I was really... I don't want to say worried. That might be a little bit harsh of a word, but I was curious for Sean because it didn't sound like you were super hyped on to see this movie initially. But man, watching it the whole time, I'm like, how can anyone not enjoy this movie? It's such a great, fun, easy time. It's very indicative of a kind of film in the 90s in a lot of ways, but I think in a lot of the best ways.
Yeah, I agree.
I think it might be just a shade too long. Honestly,
there's
like
perhaps
it's 2 hours
it's
and 17 minutes,
yeah.
I think. Yeah. And this is the kind of movie I believe would have maybe been a little bit better suited with a sub 2 hour runtime, because it's nice, it's fun, but sometimes it takes a little too long to get from fun spot to fun spot. Like the Mummy movie, I could absolutely get my kids to watch because it's not too long. It gets going pretty quickly. This one has moments where I feel like it's lingering to get where it's going. And it's not that kind of movie,
I guess I can see that if your kids are watching this movie. But this movie took me by surprise. Even though I will tell you, Adam, to answer your response there, this was not a movie that I didn't like. I liked this movie. I remember liking it even, but what I forgot is just how blazing hot the sexual chemistry is between the two leads in this movie.
When you're watching this movie, you believe that 1,000%. These two, Melanie Griffith should be off to the side during this film, just wringing her hands together, going, "Well, how dare you? How dare you?" Because it is palpable. Like, you thought for sure that these two were going to have some sort of, romantic tryst after this movie, because it is blazing between these two. And who could blame them? They're both just like two of the most gorgeous people, and they still both look fantastic today. So it's like, it's been 20 years, but my goodness.
And I can also remember at the time in 98, 99, when I saw this movie, just how hard it was for me to believe that Catherine Zeta-Jones was Welsh. Like, I thought she had to be Spanish.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Well, that is one of the biggest problems of this movie, isn't it? You just nailed it right there, which is that there is, of all of our leads in this movie, there is not a single Mexican to be found in a movie that takes place in Mexico. And that is a massive, massive problem.
Well, at the same time, too, though, and they touch on it a little bit in the movie about how there's a lot of people also from Spain and stuff as well. And those people, some Spaniards tend to look a little bit more like white people than, what we would consider.
Yeah, but Adam.
I'm not saying that you're not wrong. But at the same time, what I'm also saying is, and I point this to a lot of people when they talk about the disparity, and again, I'm not saying that they don't have a point, because they certainly do. But in 1996, tell me who the Latin stars are that would have populated this and made this the $200 million worldwide movie that it was.
How about we back this up a little bit? And I tell you that the original, I don't know if it's the original director, but they had signed Robert Rodriguez to direct this before Martin Campbell.
Yeah, and so this is a movie that is out by Columbia TriStar, and that was who Robert Rodriguez was working with in Desperado. So obviously it was their guy, and that was a huge hit, and so why not?
Here's what I'm going to say. First off, I think had he directed it, maybe we get a little bit different cast, but he is who brought Antonio Banderas into the cast. It was his idea. Right. That was his guy because, of course, Desperado. Right. But here's another thing. When he's directing it, they have a budget dispute because he wants $45 million, or no, he wants $42 million. They say they won't go above 41. So he leaves the project. They bring on Martin Campbell, give him $60 million. It ends up costing him $70 million. So that kind of says a little bit of something about the studio right there.
It's a little rough, but at the same time,
doesn't get as much money as Campbell.
Yeah, but here's the thing, that's the big difference. Robert Rodriguez at that point had Desperado. And then Martin Campbell, like I said, came off of GoldenEye, which was just gigantic. So they're going to tend to give that guy a little bit more money, just on account of he was a bigger director at the time. He just was.
I think it also just kind of exposes some issues with the studio and with the movie.
You mean to tell me that studio systems are not?
Gives us a great movie with this subject matter.
No, I don't
tell
disagree.
You right now, I'd rather watch Desperado than GoldenEye, personally.
Different reasons.
GoldenEye had a great video game. I'm not arguing with that, but the movie,
Still a fan. But I was like, that was like the perfect age for me when that movie came out and stuff too. So no.
And I can't. To go backwards for a second here. I mean, you can argue all you want, but this movie is the reason why the term whitewashing is a term in the first place. I mean, this is really, really bad.
I don't know. They've been doing it for like I said. It's a Hollywood tradition, like it or not. So I mean, it went on way longer than this.
But
one.
I mean, this is the first movie that I can think of where even me as a white male, I'm like, you guys got to do better than this. Like, this is ridiculous.
And then here's something else I'll say: make what you will of Anthony Hopkins being cast as Don Diego, but originally Sean Connery was cast as Don Diego.
Well, he had played a Spaniard before.
So why not?
And it would have been just as unconvincing here, I'm sure.
But here's the thing, though. Like, all that stuff aside, everyone in this has a magnetic personality that you can't help but enjoy watching what they're doing. Anthony Hopkins, like, I wouldn't have thought it, but like you look at him, even at Zorro at the beginning, this is not an age of CGI where they're de-aging him or anything like that. But he puts on the mask and is doing his Zorro thing at the beginning of the movie as, kind of younger Zorro. And boy, if he doesn't just exude all of that charm and coolness that you would want to see in Zorro. And then when he brings that in, it's what they've been trying to do with so many movies these days is like, usher in kind of the new generation. And it never really works all that well. But here it seems like it works super well. They set up the story really great. You like where this kid is coming from. He grows up and then, there's that Zorro guy that, kind of saved us back in the day. We helped save him, all that kind of good stuff. It works really, really well.
I've got just like a base question, though. Like, this movie isn't necessarily the continuation of any other specific Zorro movie. Why did they feel the need to create a new Zorro instead of just letting Antonio Banderas play Diego and you let Anthony Hopkins play Alejandro and you just make a more straightforward Zorro movie?
Because I could be wrong here. This is just a guess, but it feels like to me that you've had a long history of Zorro films, all the way back to Fairbanks and all that kind of stuff. And to really, that was a move to get young people to like it. It's like, hey, we're switching out this old guard. Here's this new thing. Look at these new, young, attractive people and stuff. Aren't they cool?
I want to take you to task on that, Adam. Do you think young people are saying, man, I'm not going to go watch that square Don Diego, but they bring in a new Zorro, I'll go watch it. You really think
there's two parts to this. One is that you want to have a bit of tradition. And at the time, if you remember, there was a whole lot of that happening in comic books also, where like the like the mantle is passed to the next generation. There was a whole lot of that happening in comic books at the time. So that's part one.
Okay.
Part two is there is a massive problem with the character of Don Diego as Zorro, because he is a multimillionaire who protects the poor people. And that does not work in 1998. And
is that why they didn't make a Batman movie around that time?
Well, look, man. I mean,
Can I tell you
Batman
my
is the
theory?
exception here.
Can
But
I tell
yes,
you
I get what you're saying.
Here's
but
my theory. I
Go
think
ahead.
it comes to IP because Don Diego Zorro is public domain. You create a new Zorro and you can own that character.
Oh,
That's
my
actually
theory.
that you're probably not wrong.
very clever.
Because you'll notice once Zorro entered the public domain, all the Zorro properties were like the Passing of the Torch type movie or cartoon
Right.
or TV show. It was never just Don Diego. It was always someone new taking up the mantle. And I think it's so
Right.
you could own that particular Zorro.
Clever.
That's not my Zorro. My Zorro's Antonio Banderas.
And then I think there might be like a tail wagging the dog because Zorro is Spanish. You know, he's always been Spanish. The character of Zorro is Spanish, but you ask anybody in America and they will swear Zorro is Mexican.
Mhm.
So why not just make Zorro Mexican? for
They'll
this
also
movie,
swear
you know?
Antonio Banderas is Mexican, also non-Mexican, Spanish. So
Yeah, you know, but that, and then that's just part of it too. I think it's just easier for people like, you know what? Instead of having everybody complain, why did you make Zorro Spanish? Let's just do what they expect and not what it should be.
Right. And there's a lot of that in this movie too, where the things that you know about Zorro, they nail in this movie, and they do it quickly too. You know, I mean, from the first act, or I'm sorry, even the first scene in this movie, 10 minutes, you're getting Zorro. It doesn't start in the prison, like none of that. Like right away, bam, Zorro.
he's going into it. He's got the mask and the sword. He's riding the horse, and like with the horse getting on its hind legs with the sun in the background. It's just nothing but iconic stuff, frame after frame. It's so good.
Yep.
And there's also some nuggets, like if you're a second level Zorro fan, like beyond just who Zorro is. It's widely been speculated that this folk hero type figure named Joaquin Murrieta, who was actually in California about that time, who was a Robin Hood type. He was a bandit who fought against the colonial government in favor of the common folks at the time. And he wound up being hunted down by a captain named Harry Love, and he was hung. And his name was Joaquin Murrieta. And when you see those two kids at the beginning, one of those kids grows up to be Antonio Banderas, whose name is Alejandro Murrieta. And that other kid is Joaquin. His brother's Joaquin Murrieta. So it's like a little history, Easter egg for folks who are familiar with the legend of Joaquin Murrieta as being the inspiration for Zorro. But instead of it being Joaquin, who's a real historical figure, you can't own that IP. They give him a fictional brother named Alejandro who becomes Zorro. Harry Love, the guy that hunted him down, Harrison Love is the name of that cavalry captain with the blonde hair that Zorro kills with the gold bars. So there's a little bit of history speckled in here.
Yeah.
And then also Alejandro was the name of Zorro's father, Alejandro de la Vega. And they give Antonio Banderas here the first name of Alejandro. So they're throwing some nuggets there for like I call the second level Zorro fan.
And he does have a son by the end, so one could put it together.
Yeah, name him Diego Murrieta, and you got a third Zorro on your hands.
So Zorro was passed down. But again, I also like the idea that this was much like the Phantom, where it's like, hey, the Zorros had many names and blah blah blah. I like that kind of mythology, especially with characters that are like this.
Yeah, and then Esperanza, Don Diego's wife and the mother of the Catherine Zeta-Jones character. In the books and things, Esperanza's name was Lolita. And, of course, the Zorro books predate the infamous Nabokov book. So I can see why maybe they thought they wanted to change that name.
Yeah, it's kind of got a connotation these days.
Yeah.
Yeah, very different from what the original author would have thought with that name.
I just wanted to get this out of the way. Man, oh man, is James Horner's score amazing. in this movie. It is so good, just all of it, the arrangements of it. I love the kind of the guitar, the horns, all of that kind of good stuff. Man, oh man, it's a shame that he died not too awful long ago. But man, James Horner scores great.
He has credited the score of El Cid, or El Cid, however you want to pronounce it, as being the inspiration for this one, which I can see those similarities.
Yeah.
Very epic in scope.
It's so good. It just like it keeps that pace moving and everything, and honestly, when even the like you start on kind of black and hear with some text and stuff, hearing the kind of clogging feet there and everything at the beginning, it was just like it brought back this movie instantly for me. I'm like, oh my gosh, I am in for such a good time. Just and I'm just like, I just got pumped right then and there. It's so good.
Can somebody explain to me how Martin Campbell can save the twice? Make this movie 3. Whether or not you love those 3 movies, they're very well made movies. How is the same guy who's directing that also directing Green Lantern? He's
had a very odd career, to say the least, Martin Campbell. I mean, it's everything from that to you got that Zorro. They bring him back to do a Casino Royale, to have all that come in there. Then you've got like that really hardcore, The Edge of Darkness, which is just Mel Gibson just railing through people left and right. Yep. He's got such a weird and varied career that I kind of like it. You can't quite pin him down. He's got good stuff and some really crummy crap as well.
I guess everybody's allowed a stinker here and there, and then it also opens up like the bigger question of different films will allow the director to have their vision to different degrees.
Yeah, and I was excited that when he did what's it called, like Foreign Correspondent, I think that's the name of it, the one that came out like probably a year or two ago with Jackie Chan and stuff, and I thought like, oh, this might be great, just a real serious role for Jackie Chan, and it was such a sleepy, know-nothing movie. I was just like, oh, gosh.
Oh, is it? That's a shame, because I was looking at that and circling it on my calendar.
I wish it was good, but it was so boring. Gosh, it was bad.
Oh, that sucks.
And I thought, also, Martin Campbell, this is going to be awesome. We're getting him back into like that. And it's like, nope, you got him on one of his off years.
I'll also say I would have liked to have seen a Zorro movie made by the guy who directed Desperado. I don't want to see one made by the guy who directed Spy Kids. So take that for what it's worth.
Hey, man, them Spy Kids are fun movies. They're not the highest of cinema, but they are what they are. They're made for a particular
How about Shark
audience.
Boy and Lava Girl? Was that his?
Yes, it was, actually.
Oh, man, I had to watch that movie I would say it one too many times for comfort.
I could see your kids
all of the Spy Kids movies, Shark Boy and Lava Girl, I think with a few exceptions, there's like a movie here and there. Those are the movies that I had to watch the most, and I hate them.
Yeah, Shark Boy and Lava Girl is probably the bottom of those barrels too, and that's
oh yeah,
that's
it is the worst one.
I bought it because it was kind of like neat on DVD to have it in like 3D. They're like, oh, we have like these anaglyph, 3D glasses. I was like, oh, this will be kind of fun. It's terrible. Like it's like not even like the crummy 3D helps it be any sort of fun. It's just not very good.
Oh, it's awful.
Now something that didn't sink home with me in 1998 that sunk home with me now is like with the evolution of Alejandro Murrieta from just sort of mid-level bandit to Zorro, and the way that Banderas's look changes through it. Something that was lost to me before is what I mentioned in my little hello notes at the very beginning, but just how much it seems like he is Inigo Montoya when he's at that in-between stage.
You mean with the facial hair and everything?
Well, yeah, the facial hair is similar. The haircut is similar because it doesn't go all the way short yet.
Yeah.
And then also, I mean, the Spanish accent's going to be there with both characters for a reason, but it's just like, wow, I'm watching this and I can't help but think like, man, that's totally Inigo Montoya. And then when he puts the mask on, I'm like, whoa, he just became the Dread Pirate Roberts. And then I'm sitting here thinking about how much fun a couple of these sword fights are. And then I can't think about cinematic sword fights without, of course, thinking about that Robin Hood, Errol Flynn thing that we talked about a couple of weeks. And then my all-time favorite, as most people probably would say, is that Princess Bride, Dread Pirate Roberts, Inigo Montoya sword fight. And I'm like, wow, he gets to be both sides of that.
Yeah, the swashbuckling in this is so great. So much great sword fighting, and it would have been interesting to also see what Rodriguez would have done with that. But for what it's worth, man, Martin Campbell really pulls off all of this great action. You just feel a sense of movement. They use like every trick in the book. You know, we got people climbing on chandeliers and stuff to like, you name it. It's so good. There's enough like fun humor in it to where, you know, it's not always taking itself super seriously. I love the fact that he goes to, jump off the building onto his horse and his horse moves out of the way and kind of looks back and like, oh, what an idiot. It's stupid fun stuff that like in the 90s was just all over the place.
It's like really fun. They do embrace a whole lot of comedy here, which I think is also a nice little similarity to The Princess Bride again. Like jumping into the horse and missing it is so much fun. And, you know, the initial interactions when him and Catherine Zeta-Jones are together and she's trying to sword fight him. Like there's just a whole lot of fun there too. And I'm going to say that, you know, there's always room for taste. Everybody has their own preferences, but I think this is the best looking Zorro costume I've ever seen on film.
Oh, yeah, me too. I agree with you.
Yeah. I love how also, like, they didn't make her, she's not like this damsel in distress. She can definitely handle herself. And, you know, during those little sword fighting scenes and whatnot between the two of them, and it's also just the, you know, the sexy dance of the fighting and everything. It's so good. And again, you feel that heat coming off the two of these characters, and it's just so good.
And, you know, there's all the fun with when he cuts her shift off and her hair falls down just perfectly, and then she grabs like that big platter tray, whatever, to cover. You know, there's a lot of little fun teasing going on there.
Yeah, it's so good. And like, and again, they don't play her dumb or anything, which is just so nice, because a lot of times it would just be like, oh, it's this, you know, she couldn't figure stuff out. She's very smart. She's very capable. And, you know, thankfully we're in that 90s era where we at least allow that character to spread her wings and do something other than just be the like, oh, woe was me. We don't need that anymore. And it's nice that this movie doesn't fall into that easy trap.
I'm surprised we haven't talked about the secret success of this movie yet, which to me is the bad guys, both bad guys in this movie. You want them murdered so bad while watching this thing, and they're both so good, and they're both well acted, and like to the point where like I'm gonna say that they're probably like top 10 of my favorite villains because they're so awful.
Yeah.
And Stuart Wilson's character was initially cast to be played by Armand Assante, so there's another difference there.
Well, they did right, because Armand Assante would be chewing the scenery up and screaming and spitting.
Yeah.
Well, some of us kind of like that.
No kidding. But yeah, Stuart Wilson is great in this. He just has that just that menacing kind of air, and you're right. He doesn't go over the top with it, and it almost makes him scarier because he's not going
and you just
leaning
hate him
into it
so much.
Yeah, super scumbag.
I agree with that.
Just I'm gonna shoot you. Like we shoot. I thought this was such a great little nod here to be able to progress the story along. It seems obvious, but in trying to get Zorro, he then shoots the lady that he loves and then adopts the child and all that kind of good stuff. It's it's so smart. It's just a very, and then he's going to put him in prison and have a long time hatred of this guy. Surely he's dead at some point. And then when this Zorro comes out, there's so much to it that, like, man, it was really thought out.
And it also works on this level that I really like on a movie like this, particularly an action movie, maybe what I would call a lighter, more fun action movie, is like, the whole plot with the gold mine, the whole motivation he wants to get is like, it doesn't really matter too much what it is they're fighting over, because you're having so much fun along the way that even if you don't really know what their goals are, all you need to know is like, these are the bad guys, these are the good guys, and you can sit back and enjoy some of it.
But yet at the same time, it's a plot that I don't know that, at least that I've seen or been super familiar with a whole bunch, is he doesn't know this part of the land exists. We're going to this land. We're mining all the gold that he doesn't know about. We're going to stamp it with our own thing, so he believes that it's that. We're going to purchase the land that we're stealing from with money that we got from that land. I'm like, man, if you couldn't be more of a bad guy, that's so great. What an amazing story plot point. I love that.
Now, the three-fingered Jack guy.
Yes.
He's like he's there a little bit in the beginning, then he disappears. He comes back at the end. That's another character that I thought was a lot of fun, and one that maybe could have easily been overdone, but they managed to avoid that temptation and kept the fun there.
L.Q. Jones, the name of that guy. And guess what? He was born in 1927, and according to IMDb, still kicking.
Whoa.
Man, so he's 93 and doesn't look a day over 87. Good for him.
Born in Beaumont, Texas. But
Now, there was a sequel to this 7 years later. Did you guys ever see the sequel?
I did.
I can't remember if I have or not. I remember seeing it, and it did feel like then that it was just like, oh man, this should have come out like 2 years ago, like 2 years after the first one, and it would have made a ton of money. It almost seemed like, you know, the fruit was off the vine for too long at that point.
And it's like there's this weird balance where you make a sequel 2 or 3 years later, that's cool. You make a sequel 25 or 30 years later, that catches people's attention.
Yeah.
But like 7 years is in that who asked for this range.
Well, James Cameron's about to turn around and give us, 3 or 4 flicks with that prospect in mind, and I don't think it's going to go as well as he thinks.
Yeah, but any idea why, like 7 years later? That is just kind of a weird time for a sequel for this, and they brought a lot of the original cast back, right?
Yeah, and Martin Campbell is a director as well. To me, I think one of the big things is that this movie made some stars. I mean, Antonio Banderas was already kind of a star, but like this kind of really shot him to that next level, I think. And Catherine Zeta-Jones, had she done television and a couple other things previously?
I didn't know she was before this. I mean, this brought her to my attention.
This was the one that put her on the map for everybody. She was, as far as everyone else in the regular world was concerned, this was her first thing, despite her doing a bunch of TV stuff previous to this. But man, oh man, I think that this launched these two into such a career that you couldn't. It's tough to nail them down,
Do you remember the sequel well enough, Sean, to say if it's on par with this one or not?
It's not. It was a big letdown for me when I saw it. I haven't watched it since it came out to Blockbuster when I saw it, but it was not. It was not what I wanted it to be, and I think a lot of that has to do with where Catherine Zeta-Jones and Antonio Banderas were at that time. Because when you see them in this movie, you're just like, holy cow, those people have sexy sex. But when you watch them in the sequel, enough time had passed to where, and you knew them well enough, like in their personal lives, where you were like, wow, this just isn't the same anymore. So there's that. On top of that, secret sauce again. The villain in the sequel is not nearly as great as the two villains in this thing.
Okay.
And also, you don't have that backdrop of the Count of Monte Cristo that you do with the first Zorro. You know? That is not there for the sequel. And they kind of, like, they didn't know where to go is what it felt like.
I could see that, man. And that's a shame, because a big part, I think, of what this movie feels like to me is like it's putting a lot of work into establishing who this version of Zorro is. And if you're putting that work into establishing the character, it'd be nice if you could do a little bit more with him, where you didn't have to spend an hour and 15 minutes, an hour and 30 minutes just getting to where he puts on the costume.
Family. It's two of them with the boy, and it's not nearly as fun. I mean, it just isn't.
Yeah. And Bruce, you talk about how, like, obviously it takes a while for him to, become Zorro, if you will. I think that's a lot of the charm of this movie. I love the fact that we're taking this, kind of, street rat kid and, raising him up to kind of know exactly. And they certainly don't do it nearly as much as you would probably think would go on in this. You think we'd have countless training montages. And, like, there's even a point where he just goes, you think... More or less, it's just like, you think it's going to take a lot of work to make me a gentleman and stuff, and like, yeah, that's going to be the hardest thing that we're going to have to do here. Yeah. Cut to, he's a gentleman, and the best part is he's like, Antonio Banderas just sells that bit so well. of like, that's acting on top of acting. You're acting as this character, acting as a nobleman, and it absolutely works. And when they have, again, just that sex appeal between the two of them, that dance is just fantastic. So you've got these two people, and you can see this, Don Diego out there at the corner, or what's his nose? I forget. There's so many Dons in this flick. Don Raphael, excuse me. Don Raphael just like looking at his daughter, dancing with this guy, and what that dad is thinking. He's just like, what the heck's going on here? And just goes, it's so good. And he just goes, oh, well, that's how we dance into Spain kind of thing. It's so good.
Yeah, it just the whole movie. To me, this didn't feel like a movie that I wanted to be. Like I've said before, 2 hours and 17 minutes long. I felt like it would have been worth tightening up just a notch or two. And part of what I would have tightened it up is I feel like we spend too long with Alejandro and Joaquin as kids, and then once he's an adult, I feel like we spend a little too long before he meets Don Diego. But then once he meets Don Diego, I don't have any complaints with the pacing, and I think all the beats that they hit are just fine. I just think you could bang the drum 3 times instead of 5 times, and it would have been as good.
That's probably fair.
I want to bring this up too. Again, it's The Crow just done better. This movie.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Wow.
You got the Z on fire. Zorro does it better than the Crow with the Crow on fire.
Yeah.
It's a revenge fantasy. This revenge fantasy is far superior to the Crow. This movie is a better Crow movie.
So just imagine Eddie Furlong as Zorro.
I would pay so much money to see modern day Eddie Furlong as Zorro. Just put a mask on him. Or maybe it's kind of like Ghost Riders. We could just give him a motorcycle instead of a horse.
Man, Eddie Furlong should be Ghost Rider.
It could. Listen, there's not a worse idea. I mean, you could.
It's better than Nick Cage's Ghost Rider.
That's true.
I'm going to come up with a totally original character called Crow Rider, starring Eddie Furlong.
Crow Rider, starring Flo Rida.
That's still the second best Crow movie. Don't forget, the Eddie Furlong one is the second best Crow movie there is.
No arguments for me on that one, man. I got something here that you guys may or may not know. This movie was filmed in Mexico, and this was a real shocker when I read it. But the producers were frustrated by Mexican customs agents because some of their props and other necessary items were held by customs. They didn't want to relinquish them to the production.
That's not wildly uncommon because Robert Rodriguez himself had come across some problems like that with shooting some of his films as well. So it's not unfounded for sure. So it's certainly not just this production.
I used to have a friend that made movies or worked on movies, and I think he told me he had to have a dummy bag that you could just count on being kept or being held so you could get the real stuff that you needed over.
Oh, yeah. You got to have that dummy wallet when somebody, goes to rob you. You just here, it's got $25 in it.
Or something. Like laptops that actually you didn't need that they could just keep, and then you would have the laptops you needed.
Call that a Neil Breen film. That's for 4 people out there that know what that is. But they love it. Yeah, to me, it's just a whole bunch of fun. Oh, we got to talk about the what was his role there? Was it just soldier? I guess the other big bad other than Don Raphael.
Yeah, that's the Captain Harrison Love character.
Yeah, he is. First of all, Will Forte could be a stunt double. I think.
I'd go with that.
Yeah.
He's got a very Will Forte look about him that it's certainly not nearly as comedic, which thankfully is the case.
Trying to place it, and that's exactly what it is.
He looks exactly like a Will Forte character. Just if he would have just, leaned into the country accent a little bit more and just been more emphatic in certain lines, it would have been easy.
I could also see Cole Hauser.
Or Wingshauser even. Wingshauser is that character with the beard and the hair. I would have paid double for that. Man, oh man. By the way, if you want to see the best Wingshauser performance ever, check out a movie called Get Even. And and that's Get Even, all one word, not 2 different words. It's also called Road to Revenge.
I thought it was called Get a Van. I've been saying it wrong for a long time.
Well, it all depends on, if if you've got a space bar in your keyboard. which apparently the people that put up the title sequence for that forgot. They didn't have one. Didn't function right.
Image Comics made the official tie-in comic for this movie back in '98, but I've never checked that one out. I may have to look and see if that's like something I can take a peek at online.
Wait a second. Are you telling me that Image Comics took a chance to possibly make a little bit more money by selling us yet another book? I love Image, don't get me wrong, but they were kind of the kings of that sort of stuff, it always seemed to me.
So, 98, you still got your core Image founders as the biggest part of the company. Adam, which one of them do you think does the art for the Zorro comic?
Ooh.
Let me guess next.
Mark Silvestri. That's not right, I know.
Portatio.
Well, Will Spertasio's definitely who I would want to do it.
You're right, because he's more of the workhorse, and I could see him just kind of stepping in and like really banging that out.
And also, he's the only one of the founders I've ever like spoken with personally, so I like the guy. But I could probably see Silvestri doing it, even if it's not the right choice necessarily. Somehow I see him doing it, and there's no way Liefeld gets near this one because he's not a good match.
No, and he'd be doing weird stuff, just things that you'd never see Zorro doing, like he has a machine gun for some reason.
And Jim Lee was still part of the Image crew at this point in time.
Hey, listen, now don't get me wrong. My favorite comic artist of all time. If you want to put that guy doing anything, I'll read it. I'm A-okay with that.
But I like the Will Spertasio. I think that's the winner. I take back when I said Silvestri's probably who would have done it. I like the idea of now the thing is, I'm talking about this as if I couldn't just look up and see who it was. But I'm not going to. I'm just going to believe it was Will Spertasio.
That's what we call the Adam Portrais method, Bruce. I'm proud of you that it's finally starting to rub off. I could look this up easily on the internet, but you know what? Am I gonna? No. Anything else? Like I said, I can't believe how much fun I had with this, and like I knew it was going to be fun right from the get of go with the music and everything. I find every single one of these characters just wildly appealing. You can't stop watching them, and the movie, you're right, Bruce. There may be a couple of minutes that could be taken out of it for sure, but for the most part, it just kind of keeps trucking. There's not a lot of like real boring stuff, and even the things where we're sitting down at a table and talking. Even that stuff's not boring because there's like a level of, kind of spycraft, if you will, that's underneath it where like he's got to answer the questions kind of in the right way. And, all of these poor people, forget them. We don't need these poor people and all that kind of just like really leaning kind of into the stereotypical thing that he believes that he should be. And I love the throwaway line where it's like, well, isn't he going to recognize you from, it's like, listen, he's a nobleman. He's just not even going to be looking at me because I'm just that low on the scale for him. I thought there was just so many smart writing choices that took place in this movie.
I'd also like to point out that Anthony Hopkins, I think that this is probably his version of walking through a movie. And even with that being said, just terrific in this thing.
He's killing it. Like, yeah, it looks like it comes to him with such wild ease. And I think that also informs, the Don Diego character itself, is that everything kind of seems like he's just sort of walking through it. It's very minimal effort for him to do all these things. And they got cool little stupid stuff, like him whipping off all the candles and stuff like that. I didn't need to be there, but it's cool that he's doing it. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm going to make a bold statement here. I'm going to say that perhaps Anthony Hopkins is better than your average actor.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the guy's been around since the dawn of time for a reason. He kind of keeps it going.
You talking about the guy who plays the piano on Twitter with his cat?
Is that what he does?
Exactly that guy.
Sounds.
I didn't know he was an actor.
The guy that just brought so much gravitas to Mission Impossible 2.
Are you just not going to be happy unless you get me mad? Is that really the goal?
I'm sorry, too. The Transformers Last Night or whatever that movie was called.
After the second Transformers movie, I stopped watching them, and I didn't even watch all of 2. I was maybe 15 minutes in and went, not for me, thanks. I'm done.
Oh, I paid double to watch Transformers 2 because I was just, it made me so mad.
You paid double?
Yeah.
Like they said, that'll be $5, and you just slid him a 10. And
Oh
said,
no,
"Keep
it
the
was
change, buddy."
it was way worse than that because that movie came out in IMAX, right? And that was one of the kind of first ones that they were sort of doing that with. Well, they had it over at and I would never suggest this to anyone. Don't go to a dome IMAX. They're terrible for regular movies. They're good for all that, like underwater and space crap. Go do it for that. But like for a regular theatrical film, don't do it. It distorts the screen way too much. But I was like, hey, man, I get to see this on a big screen. I don't care if it's dome. Let's go check it out. And so I bought the tickets online. And so the tickets were probably like 15, $18 or something like that. It was expensive. And I got there and I was like, hey, I'd like to pick up the tickets for this. And she's like, okay. And then I guess she asked for my card because they needed to, look up the number or whatever to get me this thing. And no, they just charged me for those tickets as well. So I actually bought like 3 or 4 tickets twice to go see that. I was so flipping mad, dude. And for a presentation that I thought was just, pretty terrible. It was huge, but it was terrible. And I was so mad. Still to this day. Can you tell?
You want to know what the first theatrical release was that I ever saw on an IMAX screen?
What's that?
It was the Mark Wahlberg Planet of the Apes movie.
That's awesome.
It was also the last one I saw on an IMAX screen for a very long time.
That's so awesome.
There are bits of that movie that I think are okay. Most of it's bad, but there are bits that I'm like, oh, it's all right. I love Rick Baker's makeup in that. Like, it's good looking, but let's be honest, the newer Ape flicks are just so much better. So much.
Yeah, I think it's the Mark Wahlberg part that's the bad part.
Yeah.
No, new Mark Wahlberg is great. Well, before we get to our final review here and everything, we do have to ask ourselves a very important question: is how does this Zorro movie relate back 1-to-1 with Sylvester Stallone?
Thanks, Adam. I have a prepared statement. Hey, guess what, guys? This week's Stallone connection, you're never going to believe it. Antonio Banderas, he was in Spy Kids 3D with Sylvester Stallone. But lucky for us, he's also in Expendables 3 and the movie Assassins, starring Antonio Banderas and Sylvester Stallone. It also stars Julianne Moore, and it's the dumbest movie from 1995 you'll ever see. It's supposed to look cool and edgy, and there's a bit of Pulp Fiction thrown in there because it's during a time where every movie had to be Pulp Fiction, and it's just the worst, and no one should ever see it. The movie came out in 1995, and Stallone's character is looking to retire from the business, which means that Stallone has been looking to retire in each of his movies for 25 years now. Assassins has Stallone's favorite type of character from the 90s, the well-dressed hitman. And it served him well. There are many people who thought he was great, but don't just take my word for it. Let's go to the IMDb user reviews, and a user who calls himself Ramstein2 really paints the picture for you. I'm quoting here. There are some touches that make me think of the Matrix in this movie. The gunfighting scenes are really good, mostly because they are very silent. The assassins both use silencers, which adds new flavor to a well-used dish. I like that part very much. I like that part very much. I just love that. And Banderas is great to watch as usual. There simply isn't anyone with his mimics and body language anywhere else. Stallone does a good job too, actually. Julianne Moore, who could say anything bad about her? Entertaining, fast-moving, and please, check out that gunfighting. Quote, thank you, Ramstein2. There you have it, HMPers and Dinglingers. This week's Stallone. Antonio Banderas. I'm Sean Kovacs. You're welcome, English-speaking Earth.
Well, here at Hero Movie Podcast, we have our own patented Robin rating system. If you'd like to check that out, head on over to Facebook.com/Hero Movie Podcast. It's right there at the top of the screen. And why don't you throw us a like there while you're at it? And while you're at it, too, I want to mention this before we get to the review, is check us out on YouTube. If you're ever at a place where you're like, oh, I can't listen to the podcast for whatever reason or whatnot, just check us out on YouTube. Here, YouTube.com/Hero Movie Podcast. We got like 1,300 subscribers, man, and we'd like you to become one of those as well. And perhaps I might be putting up a video there in not too awful long talking about the Snyder Cut and whether or not that's an actual thing. So check that out, youtube.com/HeroMoviePodcast. Bruce, where does The Mask of Zorro from 1998 fall on the Robin rating system for you?
When I'm having fun watching this movie, I'm having a lot of fun. And I know that I harped on, I feel like it's a little bit too long a couple times, but that doesn't mean it's not a movie that I enjoyed. I could see me liking it a little bit better if it was a little shorter. But still, I think this is Tim Drake territory, but it's 15 minutes past what would make it a high Tim Drake, so I'm going to put it more at a lower Tim Drake, but it's still good fun. I love these like throwbacks to an older type of movie. I like that kind of stuff. This, The Mummy.
Tim Drake it is. Sean, what do you got?
Oh, this movie is a straight up Tim Drake for me. I very much enjoy this movie. It was a surprise. I remembered liking it. I really did, but I like it more than I remembered liking it. There's also it's sort of, even though it's sort of timeless because it takes place in the past, it does feel very 98. And looking back on that, for me, it was like, oh, this is nostalgic. So for me, it is a Tim Drake. I like it.
Yeah, this is a Dick Grayson for me. I've always liked this movie. I was actually pretty stoked when our supporters over at Patreon picked it this week because I knew I'd be having a good time. And it's actually a better time than I thought I would actually have. I thought I would, enjoy it well enough. And I'm like, whew, it's not going to be a slog. Yay. And no, it was outright enjoyable and just a great time. And I think a lot of that has to do with the direction, and of course the big thing is the stars of this. Banderas, Zeta Jones, Anthony Hopkins are just all spectacular in their roles, and we've got two great villains. And man, you can't much beat that. And again, the score is just so perfectly fit, and it is it's a late 90s movie, but I think in one of the best ways that's out there. So that's The Mask of Zorro. It's available on Netflix as of this recording, so go check that out. And thank you to everyone who supports us over at patreon.com/HMP. You guys are the reasons that we kind of keep this show going, and when you vote on the good movies, boy, we appreciate it even more.
Yeah, this might be the best one that has been listener choice.
Yeah, sometimes they do enjoy sticking the knife in and twisting it a little bit just to see what'll happen. And, I get it. Believe me, I get it. But at the same time, too, it's nice to have something that's lovely. Will next week be lovely? I'm not 100% sure. We'll talk about it in half a second here. Until then, Bruce, where can we find more of your work on the internet?
Hey, you like Zorro? You can always go check out the Zorro episode I did for Heroes and Villains. So go over there. Hear a little bit more about the character from books and comics behind these movie characters.
Sean, what else is out there?
Well, we just started a new podcast called Snowpiercer 30 Questions about the TV show Snowpiercer. Check that out. Find it. Is that fun?
You know what he was saying. His internet crapped out, but you understand what he's saying. Check it out and all those.
Did it really?
That's okay. It happens. It happens. We've had a couple of hiccups on the show, but nothing that we can't get over. So do check that out. Snowpiercer 30 Questions. I don't know. We won't have anything in the show notes this week, but we definitely will for next week. And, of course, you'll hear us promoting it on this show. Until you all go download it and give us 5-star reviews. We really appreciate all that stuff. And it's so awesome that, you guys do tend to follow us from project to project and stuff and help support this show. We really appreciate
Thank
that
you for doing
for
that.
all of you guys. And, of course, check out the Film Find. Matt and I are dropping about 2 episodes every week these days, and we're having a good time over there. So do check that out at thefilmfind.com. Next week, we're going to be talking Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow. This is Sean's pick, so we're either, as we've kind of started this year, everybody's taking blame. You people on Patreon, you're taking blame for yours. Guess what? You got one in the good column this time. But does Sean get one in the good column next week for Sky Captain and World to Tomorrow? One of the biggest blue screen movies you've ever seen in your entire life. We'll find out. So check that out next week. Until then, for Bruce Leslie, Sean Kovacs, I'm Adam Portrais. Stay super, everybody.
I'm Marty Navy.